Have you ever walked into a hotel room and felt it? That sudden drop in temperature that has nothing to do with the air conditioning. The feeling that you aren't alone, even though the key card is still cold in your hand. We check into hotels seeking refuge, a temporary home away from home. We lay our heads on pillows where hundreds have before us, trusting in the thin walls and the deadbolts to keep the outside world out. But what if the danger isn't outside? What if the horror was there long before you arrived, waiting, patient, for the next guest to turn the key? This isn't just a ghost story. This is a warning. Gather close. Turn off the lights. This is The Night Shift, and I'm your host. Tonight, we're checking into 3 true stories of terror, each one set within the suffocating walls of a hotel. Stories of doorways that lead to nightmares, of guests who vanished, and of the thin veil between our world and the next, that some hotels seem to be built directly on top of. These are 3 true scary hotel horror stories. Story 1. The Face in the Gilded Frame. Our first story takes us to the historic heart of New Orleans, a city where the veil is said to be the thinnest. It's a city of jazz, of celebration, but also of voodoo, of plague, and of secrets buried beneath the French Quarter. In 2019, a travel blogger named Sarah thought she was booking the trip of a lifetime. She'd scored a deal on a boutique hotel, a stunning 19th century townhouse with wrought iron balconies overlooking a cobblestone street. It was the kind of place that dripped with character, antique furniture, creaky wooden floors, and walls adorned with original oil paintings of old New Orleans society. Sarah arrived on a Tuesday. She was a woman who thrived on the aesthetic. She'd planned to spend her days photographing beignets and her nights capturing the neon glow of Bourbon Street. Her blog, Wanderlust and Whimsy, had been her passion project for 3 years, and this trip was supposed to be the crown jewel of her content calendar. She'd saved for months, booked the historic hotel specifically for its Instagrammable charm, and even bought a new vintage-style suitcase to match the vibe. Everything was perfect, or so she thought. When she stepped into the lobby, she was greeted by the scent of magnolia and old paper, a fragrance that seemed to seep from the very walls. The floor was a mosaic of black and white marble, worn smooth by generations of footsteps. A grand chandelier of cut crystal hung from the ceiling, though several of its bulbs were dark, casting uneven shadows across the check-in desk. The concierge, a pale man with tired eyes and a black waistcoat that hung loosely on his thin frame, slid a register toward her. His name tag read, Henri. "Welcome to the Dauphine House," he said, his voice a low mumble that seemed to come from somewhere behind his teeth. He handed her a key. It was a real key, heavy brass, attached to a diamond-shaped fob with the room number etched into it. "Room 307. Beautiful room," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Best view of the courtyard, but I'd keep the windows locked at night. The humidity gets thick, and it draws things in." Sarah laughed it off, assuming he was talking about mosquitoes or maybe the famous New Orleans humidity ruining her camera lens. She'd read about the city's bugs, its subtropical stickiness. She thanked him, took the ancient cage elevator up to the 3rd floor, and found her room. The door groaned as she pushed it open, a sound like a held breath finally released. The room was everything she'd hoped for. A 4-poster mahogany bed dominated the space, draped in a thick, white duvet that looked crisp and cool despite the heat outside. The floors were dark hard pine, polished to a high gloss that reflected the afternoon light slanting through the lace curtains. A fireplace that had been bricked over sat against the far wall, its mantel carved with cherubs and grapevines, now gray with age. And above the fireplace, in a heavy, ornate frame of gilded wood, hung a painting of a woman. She was beautiful, in a severe, tragic way. Pale skin, dark hair pulled back tightly, wearing a high-collared black dress from the 1850s. Her eyes were dark, almost black, and they seemed to follow Sarah as she moved around the room, unpacking her suitcase. It was a common trick of oil paintings, Sarah told herself. a simple artistic technique where the subject's gaze is painted straight ahead, creating the illusion of being watched. She'd seen it 100 times in museums. Still, she found herself turning her back to the painting as she hung her dresses in the armoire. She didn't want to see those eyes while she changed. She set up her camera gear on the small writing desk, plugged in her laptop, and checked her reflection in the mirror above the vanity. Her own eyes looked back at her, brown, warm, alive. She smiled, adjusted her blouse, and headed out to explore the French Quarter. The afternoon was everything she dreamed. She wandered down Royal Street, photographing the antique shops and the hidden courtyards glimpsed through iron gates. She ate a shrimp po' boy at a hole-in-the-wall joint recommended by a local, the bread crispy and the sauce spicy. She bought a small voodoo doll from a shop on Domain Street, laughing as the shopkeeper told her to keep it under her pillow for protection. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, she was exhilarated, her SD cards filling with images she knew her followers would love. She returned to the Dauphine house around midnight, her feet aching and her spirits high. The lobby was dimly lit, the concierge desk empty. A single lamp burned on the counter, illuminating a brass bell that she was tempted to ring for the hell of it, just to hear the sound echo through the empty space. She didn't. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, the old wooden steps creaking under her weight. The third-floor hallway was long and narrow, lined with doors painted a deep burgundy. The sconces on the walls flickered as she passed, as if stirred by her movement. She unlocked room 307 and stepped inside. The room was cooler than the hallway, the air conditioner humming softly. She kicked off her sandals, peeled off her clothes, and took a long, hot shower in the clawfoot tub. The old pipes groaned and shuddered, and for a moment she thought she heard something else, a faint tapping, like fingernails on porcelain, but she dismissed it as the building settling. She dried off, slipped into a cotton nightgown, and crawled into the enormous bed. The sheets were crisp and cool. She pulled the duvet up to her chin and reached for the lamp on the nightstand. Her fingers found the switch, and the room plunged into darkness. The only light came from the street lamp outside filtering through the lace curtains, casting a web of shadows across the ceiling that shifted with every passing car. She closed her eyes, her mind replaying the day's highlights, the sounds of the city a distant lullaby. She was just drifting off when she heard it, a faint creak. It wasn't the old building settling. She'd heard that all evening. The groan of timbers, the pop of wood as temperatures change. This was different. This was the sound of a floorboard, right next to the bed, compressing under weight. A slow, deliberate pressure, followed by a soft release. Sarah's eyes snapped open. She held her breath, listening. The room was silent, not the normal silence of a sleeping building, but a heavy, expectant silence, as though the air itself was waiting. She could hear her own heartbeat, a dull thrum in her ears. She waited, counting the seconds. 30, 60, 90. Just the building, she thought. Old wood expands and contracts. She forced herself to relax, her muscles slowly unclenching. She rolled over, facing the wall, her back to the painting above the fireplace. She closed her eyes again, focusing on her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The rhythm of sleep began to reclaim her. And then she heard the second sound. A rustle, like silk. It came from the direction of the fireplace. From the painting. A cold dread, colder than any she'd ever felt, began in the base of her spine and spread outward, like ice water seeping through her veins. She wanted to turn around, to face whatever was making that sound, but her body was frozen, locked in a primal paralysis that she'd only ever read about. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her face into the pillow. Just sleep paralysis, she told herself. It happens. It's a waking dream. She began reciting the details of her day in her head, a technique she used to fight off anxiety, grounding herself in reality. I walked down Royal Street. I saw a tarot reader in a purple tent. I ate a shrimp po' boy at Johnny's. I took a picture of a green balcony with ferns hanging from it. I bought a voodoo doll from a woman with one gold tooth. Her name was Mama Celeste. The rustling stopped. The silence stretched for what felt like an hour. Slowly, the tension in her muscles began to ease. Her breathing steadied. She was almost convinced, almost ready to laugh at herself. It was nothing. It was tap, a single, sharp sound, like a fingernail tapping against glass. From the direction of the painting, Sarah's eyes flew open. The terror overrode her paralysis, and she spun around in the bed, her hand fumbling for the lamp on the nightstand. She knocked over a glass of water, felt the cool liquid soak into the sheets, but she didn't care. She found the switch and clicked it on. The room was empty. The painting hung on the wall, still and silent. The woman in the black dress stared out with her dark, dark eyes. Sarah stared back, her breath ragged, her heart slamming against her ribs. She saw nothing out of the ordinary. The frame was flush against the wall. The glass was dark, reflecting only the distorted shape of her own terrified face. She almost laughed, almost, but something stopped her. A small, quiet voice in the back of her mind that said, "Look at her eyes." She looked. In the painting, the woman's dark eyes were fixed straight ahead, as they had been all day. But now, in the lamplight, Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen before. The woman's lips, they were slightly parted, not in a smile, not in a frown, just parted, as though she were about to speak, or as though she had just stopped speaking. Sarah reached out and turned off the lamp, plunging the room back into darkness. But this time, she didn't turn her back to the painting. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, the duvet pulled up to her chin, her eyes wide and unblinking. She told herself she would lie there until morning. She told herself it was all in her head. She told herself she was a rational woman who did not believe in ghosts. Then, a minute later, she saw it. A shift in the darkness above the fireplace. A sliver of light, coming from behind the painting. The painting was moving. It wasn't tilting. It was being pushed. From behind the wall, a hand, pale and slender, slid out from the edge of the gilded frame. It wasn't a solid hand. It was like looking at something through smoke and old glass, translucent, yet undeniably there. The fingers were long, the nails dark and uncut. The fingers curled around the edge of the frame, and with a slow, deliberate motion, the painting began to swing open, like a door on silent hinges. Behind it was not a wall. It was a void, a darkness so absolute it seemed to swallow the faint light from the street lamp, the glow of the digital clock, the very air in the room. It was a darkness that had weight, that pressed against Sarah's eyes, making her vision swim. And in that void, two dark eyes, identical to the painted ones, were looking directly at her. Sarah didn't scream. She couldn't. Her voice was gone, stolen by the primal terror that gripped her throat. She scrambled out of the bed, her legs tangling in the duvet, and she hit the floor hard. The impact jarred her teeth, but she didn't feel the pain. She crawled, clawed her way across the cold wooden floor, her fingernails scraping against the boards. She grabbed her purse and her room key from the nightstand, never taking her eyes off the open painting, off the darkness behind it. The hand was still there. It was reaching out now, fingers stretching toward the bed, toward where she had been sleeping. A second hand emerged, pale and skeletal, and began to push the painting further open. Sarah could see more of the void now, and in it, a shape was forming. A woman's silhouette, tall and thin, wearing a high-collared dress. The same dress as in the painting. Sarah reached the door. Her hands shook so violently that it took 3 tries to fit the key into the lock. Behind her, she heard a sound, a soft, wet sigh, like air escaping from a long-sealed chamber. She finally turned the key, threw open the door, and lunged into the hallway. She didn't look back. She ran, barefoot, in her nightgown, her purse bouncing against her hip, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She didn't wait for the elevator. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her feet slapping against the cold marble of the lobby floor before she even realized she'd reached the bottom. The night concierge, a different man from the one who had checked her in, looked up from his desk with wide eyes. He was older, with silver hair and a face lined by decades of night shifts. He saw her, barefoot, pale, shaking, and his expression shifted from surprise to a weary, knowing sadness. Room 307, Sarah gasped, leaning against the counter. "There's someone in my room. There's something behind the painting." The concierge didn't move. He didn't reach for a phone, didn't call security. He just looked at her with those tired, ancient eyes and said, "You saw her." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Who is she? What is she?" The concierge sighed and gestured for Sarah to sit in one of the lobby's velvet armchairs. He poured her a glass of water from a silver pitcher on the sideboard, his hands steady, as though he'd done this before. Perhaps he had. He told her that the Dauphine house had been a private residence before the Civil War, owned by a wealthy cotton merchant named Augustin Delacroix and his wife, Celeste. They had been a love match, the talk of New Orleans society, beautiful, devoted, seemingly blessed by fortune itself. But when the yellow fever epidemic swept through the city in 1853, Augustin became terrified. He'd seen neighbors, friends, family members struck down by the disease. He became obsessed with protecting Celeste, his greatest treasure. When Celeste showed the first symptoms, fever, aches, a yellowish tint to her skin, Augustin didn't call a doctor. Instead, he locked her in their bedroom. He bricked up the fireplace to seal any passage, and behind the painting that hung above the mantel, there was a small service door that led to a narrow passage, originally used by servants to tend to the room without disturbing the occupants. Augustin used that passage to bring Celeste food and water, but he never entered the room. He feared the sickness. For weeks, Celeste lingered in that room. She called for him, begged him to come to her, to hold her hand, to tell her he loved her. But he stayed behind the wall, leaving trays of food on a small shelf and retreating when he heard her approach. Eventually, the food trays went untouched. The calls grew weaker, and then, one day, they stopped. When Augustin finally opened the door, he found Celeste dead on the floor, her fingers clawed raw from trying to scratch through the bricked-up fireplace, her face turned toward the service passage. She had died alone, listening to the sounds of the city she loved, the sounds of life continuing without her, just beyond a wall she couldn't cross. Augustin, consumed by guilt, had the room sealed and never spoke of it again. But after his own death years later, the house was sold and converted into a hotel. The room was reopened, the painting restored, and the service passage sealed behind it. But Celeste, the concierge said, never left. She still waited by that door, still listened for footsteps in the passage, still reached for the one who had abandoned her. And sometimes, when a guest stayed in that room, she mistook them for him. She reached out, trying to draw them into her darkness. "She's not trying to hurt you," the concierge said quietly. "She's trying to hold you. She's been waiting for over 160 years for someone to come through that door." Sarah checked out that night. She never went back for her things. She had the hotel mail her camera equipment, her laptop, her clothes. When the package arrived a week later, she unpacked it in her apartment in Austin, Texas, trying to put New Orleans behind her. But there was one thing that wouldn't let her forget. The last photo on her SD card was one she didn't remember taking. It was a picture of the painting. But in the photo, the woman wasn't looking straight ahead. Her head was tilted, her dark eyes looking down, looking directly at the foot of the bed, looking directly at where Sarah had been sleeping. And in the reflection of the painting's glass, barely visible in the corner, was a face. A face with wide, terrified eyes, and a mouth open in a silent scream. It was Sarah's own face. To this day, room 307 is still available for booking at the Dauphine house. The painting is still above the fireplace, And if you're brave enough to stay there, just remember, the city's history is written in more than just books. Sometimes, it's written in the walls. And sometimes, it's looking for a way out. Story 2. The Midnight Call to Room 1418. Our second story takes us to a city of angels and broken dreams, Los Angeles. It's a city built on facades, where the glittering surface often hides a dark, decaying underbelly. In 2016, a struggling screenwriter named Daniel was trying to make his big break. He wasn't staying at the Ritz or the Chateau Marmont. He was staying at a sprawling, mid-century hotel near the airport, the kind of place with faded glamour, a cracked parking lot, and a sense of desperation that seeped into the very carpet. The Sunset Vista Motor Lodge had once been a destination for Hollywood starlets and studio executives, a place where deals were made over martinis by the kidney-shaped pool. But that was in the 1960s. By 2016, it was a way station for airline crews, budget-conscious tourists, and those who had nowhere else to go. Daniel had been there for 3 weeks, living on a shoestring budget, rewriting a horror script that he hoped would finally get him representation. He'd chosen the hotel because it was cheap, $58 a night, including a continental breakfast of stale pastries and lukewarm coffee, and because he thought the sterile, impersonal atmosphere would help him focus. No distractions, just him, his laptop, and room 1418. The room was on the 4th floor, at the end of a long corridor that smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke. The carpet was a pattern of faded orange and brown that might have been stylish in 1972, now worn thin in the center. The bed was a double, the mattress sagging in the middle. The wallpaper had begun to peel near the window, revealing patches of bare drywall. But the room had a desk, a lamp, and a phone. That was all Daniel needed. The first few days were uneventful. He'd write until the early morning, fueled by stale coffee from the lobby. His script, titled Echoes, was about a man who begins receiving phone calls from his own future self, warning him about a tragedy he can't avoid. It was a twisty, psychological thriller, and Daniel was proud of it. He was on the 3rd draft, tightening the dialogue, building the suspense. He'd submitted it to a few competitions already, and he was waiting to hear back. In the meantime, he needed to finish this rewrite before his savings ran out. But on the 4th night, something happened that shattered his focus. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the phone on the nightstand rang. Daniel jolted awake, his heart racing. The room was dark except for the glow of his laptop screen, which had gone to sleep hours ago. The phone rang again, its shrill sound cutting through the silence. He stared at it, the red light blinking in the dark, and for a moment, he was too disoriented to move. Who would be calling him at 3 in the morning? He didn't know anyone in LA. His family was back in Ohio. His agent, if he had one, would call during business hours. He picked up the receiver, his voice groggy. Hello? Silence, but not an empty silence. It was a silence filled with breathing. A slow, wet, raspy breath, like someone struggling to pull air through a damaged throat. Daniel could hear the faint crackle of static on the line, and beneath it, that awful, labored breathing. Hello? Daniel said again, his voice firmer this time. Who is this? A pause. The breathing continued. Then, a click. The line went dead. Daniel sat up in bed, staring at the receiver. He checked the caller ID, but the small LCD screen only showed unknown. He hung up and lay back down, his mind racing. A wrong number, he told himself. A prank call. Someone in another room dialing random numbers. Hotels were full of bored travelers. It was nothing. He unplugged the phone from the wall jack and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened. 3:07 a.m. The phone rang. This time, he hadn't unplugged it. He'd forgotten, distracted by a particularly difficult scene in his script. He watched it ring, the sound shrill and invasive in the silent room. He didn't answer. After 15 rings, it stopped. He told himself it was a glitch in the hotel's ancient phone system. Maybe the front desk was trying to reach him. Maybe it was a wake-up call meant for another room. But the next morning, he went down to the front desk. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read, Marisol, checked the log. No calls came through to your room, sir, she said, scrolling through a computer screen that looked like it belonged in a museum. And we don't have any outgoing calls from the lobby at that time. Are you sure it was the room phone? Positive, Daniel said. It woke me up 2 nights in a row. Marisol shrugged, her expression apologetic but unconcerned. Maybe it's a wiring issue. I'll have maintenance take a look. Daniel returned to his room, but the unease lingered. His skin prickled as he walked down the 4th-floor corridor, the faded carpet muffling his footsteps. He unlocked room 1418 and stepped inside, and for a moment, he felt like a stranger in his own space. The bed was unmade. His clothes were draped over the chair. His notes were spread across the desk. It looked lived in, normal, but the phone sat on the nightstand like a coiled snake, its cord snaking into the wall. That night, he decided to stay up. He'd worked through the 3:07 a.m. witching hour, proving to himself it was nothing. He sat in the cheap armchair by the window, his laptop balanced on his knees, the script glowing on the screen. The hours passed slowly. He wrote, deleted, rewrote. He watched the minutes tick by on the digital clock. 2:45 a.m., 2:58 a.m., 3 a.m. He listened to the hum of the air conditioner, the distant rumble of traffic on the 405, the occasional creak of the building settling. 3:02, 3:05, 3:06. His eyes were fixed on the phone. The red light blinked. 3:07. The phone remained silent. A wave of relief washed over him, so intense it almost made him dizzy. He let out a shaky laugh, the sound too loud in the quiet room. He had been psyching himself out. It was nothing. A wrong number. A crossed wire. He closed his laptop and stood up, stretching his arms above his head. His neck was stiff, his eyes gritty from staring at the screen for so long. He walked toward the bed, ready to finally get a decent night's sleep. As he passed the nightstand, the phone let out a single, deafening ring. He froze. He stared at it. The red light blinked. It rang again, and again. 4 rings. 5. Without thinking, driven by a morbid curiosity that overrode his fear, he reached out and picked up the receiver. This time, there was no breathing. There was a voice. A man's voice, low and distorted, as if it were being filtered through water or a layer of static. It was a voice that seemed to come from a great distance, yet it was also right there, pressing against his ear. "You're in my room," the voice said. Daniel's blood ran cold. "What? No. This is room 1418. I'm registered here. I've been here for 3 weeks. It's my room," the voice repeated, a note of cold anger seeping into the static. "You're sitting in my chair. You're sleeping in my bed. You're writing your little story, but you don't know the ending." Daniel's grip tightened on the receiver. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" A pause. Then, the voice spoke again, slower, more deliberate, each word stretched and warped. "The ending is you. In the closet. Can't breathe. So dark. They forgot me in here. You'll forget too." The line went dead. Daniel stood there, the receiver clutched in a white-knuckled grip, his entire body trembling. He looked across the room. At the closet, a simple, wooden sliding door with a brass handle. The same closet where he'd hung his jackets, where he'd tossed his suitcase, where he'd shoved his shoes in a pile. He'd opened it a dozen times without a second thought. But now, he couldn't look away. A cold logic, the logic of a man facing something he can't explain, took over. He replaced the receiver and walked slowly toward the closet. His footsteps were muffled by the worn carpet. The air seemed thicker, heavier, as he approached. He reached out, his hand hovering over the handle, and slid the door open. Inside, on the top shelf, behind his own few belongings, was a dusty, old cardboard box. It was the color of old paper, its edges worn soft, the word "personal" written on the side in faded marker. Daniel's hands shook as he reached up and pulled it down. It was heavier than he expected. He carried it to the bed and set it on the duvet, the cardboard scraping against the fabric. He opened the flaps. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, a pair of wire-rimmed glasses with one lens cracked, a tarnished silver watch, and a worn, leather-bound notebook with a black elastic band holding it closed. Daniel lifted the clippings first, his fingers trembling as he unfolded them. The headlines were from 1989. Screenwriter vanishes from airport hotel. Mystery deepens in disappearance of Hollywood writer. Police stumped. No sign of foul play in Sunset Vista case. Daniel read the articles with growing horror. A man named Leonard Finch, a screenwriter in his late 40s, had checked into the Sunset Vista Motor Lodge in November 1989. He'd told the front desk he needed a quiet place to finish a script. He'd paid for 2 weeks in advance, then extended his stay another week. He kept to himself, paid in cash, and rarely left his room. When he failed to check out on the scheduled date, the hotel manager opened the door. Leonard's belongings were there, his clothes, his typewriter, his notebooks, but he was gone. The door was locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of how he had left. The police searched the room, the hotel, the surrounding area. They found nothing. Leonard Finch had simply vanished. Daniel's hands were shaking so badly that he almost dropped the clippings. He set them aside and reached for the leather-bound notebook. He slid off the elastic band and opened it. The first pages were filled with tight, frantic handwriting. Leonard's script, scene after scene of dialogue and description. But as Daniel flipped through, the writing changed. The script gave way to journal entries, the dates marking Leonard's final days in the room. The handwriting became shakier, the ink smudged, as though Leonard's hand had been trembling. November 12th, third night here. The phone rang at 3 a.m. No one there, just breathing. Probably a wrong number. Hotel said no calls came through. Must be a glitch. November 13th it rang again. Same time. I didn't answer, but I heard it. 15 rings. Then silence. I'm not sleeping well. The script is suffering. November 14th I answered tonight. A voice. A man's voice. Said I was in his room. Said he wrote here too. Said I'd end up like him. I don't know what that means. November 15th I found the box. In the closet. It was always there, I just never looked. His things. His script. His name was Leonard. No, my name is Leonard. I'm Leonard. I wrote this. I'm in the room. It's my room. He's in the closet. No, I'm in the closet. Can't breathe. So dark. November 16th it calls at 3:07. It wants the room back. It wants me to go with it. I tried to leave but the door won't open. The phone rings and the voice knows my name. It's not a voice. It's me. It's me from before. It's me from before I was in the closet. I was in the closet and they forgot me. They forgot me in here. You'll forget too. The final page had only one sentence, scrawled so hard it had torn the paper. It's in the closet. It's in the... Daniel dropped the notebook as if it were on fire. He backed away from the bed, his eyes darting between the box and the closet. The closet door was still open, revealing the empty shelf, the bare rod. But behind it, in the shadowed recesses of the closet, he saw something. A darkness that didn't quite match the darkness of the room. A darkness that seemed to pulse, to breathe. He looked at the phone. The red light was blinking again. It wasn't ringing. It was just blinking. In a rhythm. Slow. Wet. Like a heartbeat. Blink. Pause. Blink. Pause. He didn't pack. He didn't wait. He grabbed his laptop, his keys, and his wallet. He left everything else. His clothes, his notes, his scripts, the box. He didn't even put on shoes. He ran to the door, his bare feet slipping on the carpet, and yanked it open. He didn't look back. He ran down the hallway, down the stairs, through the lobby, past a startled Marisol at the front desk, and out into the parking lot. He didn't stop until he was behind the wheel of his car, the engine roaring to life, the hotel shrinking in his rearview mirror. He drove for an hour before he pulled over, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at his phone. There was a voicemail, a single, 30-second recording. The timestamp, 3:07 a.m. He pressed play. At first, there was only static, a hiss of white noise that seemed to fill the car. But then, beneath it, a voice. Faint, distorted, as if coming from a great distance. A man's voice, repeating the same words over and over. "It's my room. It's my room. It's my room." Daniel finished his horror script from a motel in San Diego. He changed the ending, wrote something safer, something less personal. It became his breakout hit, a supernatural thriller that critics called chilling and unforgettable. But he never wrote another horror story again. He told friends he'd lost his taste for the genre, that he wanted to try comedy, romance, anything lighter. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. He didn't write horror anymore because he didn't have to imagine it. He'd lived it, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw that closet. He heard that voice. He felt the darkness breathing against his skin. Sometimes, late at night, his phone rings. Unknown number, 3:07 a.m. He never answers. He lets it ring, counting the rings until it stops. 15 rings. Every time, he still has that voicemail. He's never deleted it. He doesn't know why. Maybe it's a reminder. Maybe it's a warning. Or maybe, some part of him knows that one day, he'll answer the phone. And the voice on the other end will say, "It's your turn." Story 3. The Woman in the Hallway Mirror. Our final story takes us to a grand, decaying hotel in the Catskill Mountains of New York. Once a playground for the rich and famous in the 1920s, the Grand Pines Hotel had fallen into a state of faded glory by the summer of 2022. It was the kind of place that attracted nostalgia seekers, ghost hunters, and people who liked their cocktails served by a fireplace in a room filled with taxidermy bears. For Mark and Elena, it was supposed to be a romantic anniversary getaway, a chance to escape the city, to reconnect, to celebrate 10 years of marriage in a setting that felt like stepping back in time. Mark had found the hotel online, drawn to its vintage charm and the rave reviews about its restored grandeur. Elena had been less enthusiastic. The photos showed dusty chandeliers, threadbare velvet curtains, and walls lined with antique mirrors. She was a pragmatist, a graphic designer who valued clean lines and modern amenities. The Grand Pines, with its creaky floors and its history of Prohibition-era gangsters, was not her idea of a relaxing weekend. But Mark had booked the honeymoon suite, a sprawling corner room on the 4th floor, rumored to be the most haunted in the hotel, and he'd been so excited that she didn't have the heart to say no. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of pine needles and decay. The hotel was magnificent in its decline. The driveway was lined with overgrown hedges, the parking lot cracked and weedy. But the building itself was a masterpiece of 1920s architecture, a sprawling stone and timber structure with a grand entrance flanked by columns. Inside, the lobby was cavernous, with a massive, dusty chandelier that must have once been the height of elegance. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and every available surface was adorned with mirrors in ornate silver frames. They were everywhere, on the walls, above the fireplace, even behind the front desk. Elena counted 8 mirrors in the lobby alone, each one reflecting the other in an infinite regress of shadowy corridors. The concierge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a name tag that read, Margot, checked them in with practiced efficiency. She handed Mark a brass key attached to a leather fob and pointed them toward the stairs. 4th floor, corner room. The elevator's been temperamental lately. Best to take the stairs. They climbed the wide, carpeted staircase, their footsteps muffled by the thick runner. The walls were lined with black and white photographs of the hotel in its heyday. Flappers in fringe dresses, men in fedoras, a swimming pool filled with laughing guests. Elena paused at one photograph, a group shot of what looked like a wedding party. The bride was young, beautiful, dressed in a white gown that seemed to glow against the dark background. But her face was blurred, as though she'd moved at the moment the photo was taken. Or as though something had been deliberately obscured. "Mark," Elena said, pointing at the photograph. "Look at this." Mark glanced at it, then shrugged. Old camera, long exposure, people moved. He continued up the stairs, his enthusiasm undimmed. Elena lingered for a moment, staring at the photograph. There was something about the bride's posture, the way she stood slightly apart from the others, her head tilted, her hands clasped in front of her, that made Elena's skin prickle. She shook off the feeling and followed Mark. Their room was at the end of the fourth-floor hallway, a heavy oak door with a brass plaque that read, "Honeymoon Suite." Mark unlocked it with a flourish and pushed it open, revealing a large, airy space that was both beautiful and unsettling. The room had a king-sized bed with a carved headboard, a sitting area with a velvet chaise lounge, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that looked original to the 1920s. But what caught Elena's attention was the mirror. It hung on the wall across from the bed, a massive, gilt-framed mirror that stretched almost from floor to ceiling. Its surface was slightly tarnished, giving the reflection a muted, silvery quality. Elena could see herself in it, standing in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light. "I don't like it," she said, dropping her suitcase on the floor. "I don't like sleeping with a mirror facing the bed. It's bad luck. It's a portal." Mark laughed, tossing his jacket onto the chaise lounge. "It's 2022, babe. Portals aren't real. Besides, it's a mirror. It reflects things. That's all. It's a superstition," Elena insisted. "In feng shui, mirrors facing the bed disrupt sleep. They bounce energy around. They can trap spirits." Mark wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "There are no spirits here. Just us. 10 years. Can we just enjoy the weekend?" Elena forced a smile. She wanted to enjoy it. She wanted to be the kind of wife who embraced her husband's interests, who could laugh at her own fears. So she nodded, kissed him on the cheek, and began to unpack. That night, after a dinner in the hotel's dimly lit restaurant, a meal of overcooked steak and wilted salad served by a waiter who looked like he'd been working there since the 1970s, they returned to the room. Mark poured them each a glass of wine from a bottle he'd bought at the bar, and they sat on the chaise lounge, talking softly about the past decade. Their first apartment, their wedding day, the trip they'd taken to Italy for their 5th anniversary. It was comfortable, familiar, the kind of easy intimacy that comes from years of shared history. By 11 o'clock, they were both exhausted. The drive from the city had been longer than expected, and the wine had made them drowsy. They changed into their pajamas, brushed their teeth in the bathroom, and climbed into the massive bed. Mark was asleep almost immediately, his breathing evening out into a steady rhythm. Elena lay awake for a while, listening to the old building settle. The walls creaked, the windows rattled, and somewhere in the distance, she heard the mournful hoot of an owl. The moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting the room in a pale blue glow. Elena's eyes kept drifting to the mirror. She could see their reflection. Mark sleeping on his side, his back to her, his shoulders rising and falling. She could see herself, a pale shape in the white sheets, her face half turned toward the glass. She stared at her own reflection, and a strange feeling washed over her. A feeling of dissociation, of watching herself from outside herself, as though she were two people occupying the same space. In the reflection, she saw her arm move to brush a strand of hair from her face. But her real arm hadn't moved. It was lying by her side, still, the hand resting on the duvet. Her breath caught. She stared, her eyes wide. In the mirror, Her reflection lowered its hand and smiled. Alina's real face was frozen in horror. The reflection's smile was slow, deliberate, a stretching of lips that revealed teeth. The reflection leaned forward, its eyes wide, and slowly, deliberately, raised a finger to its lips in a shush gesture. Then, the reflection pointed. It wasn't pointing at Elena. It was pointing behind her. At the bed, Elena turned her head, her neck moving with a slowness born of sheer terror. Behind her, on the bed, Mark was still asleep, his breathing deep and untroubled. But standing at the foot of the bed, between Alina's side of the bed and the window, was a figure. It was a woman. She was young, perhaps in her 20s, with pale skin and dark hair that clung to her face in wet strands. She wore a pale, tattered dress that might once have been white but was now the color of old linen. Her feet were bare, her toes curled against the carpet. Water dripped from her dress onto the floor, but there was no sound. No splash, no patter, just the slow, silent fall of droplets that vanished before they hit the ground. The woman wasn't looking at Mark. She was looking at Elena. Her eyes were wide, dark, filled with a terror that seemed ancient, infinite. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, a dark, hollow O that stretched her face into a mask of agony. Elena wanted to scream, but the reflection shush had done something to her. It had stolen her voice, sealed her throat. She lay there, paralyzed, as the woman slowly raised her hand. Her fingers were long, the nails broken and dirty. She pointed at the door to the hallway. Elena looked at the door. It was closed, the deadbolt engaged. She looked back at the woman. The woman was gone. The room was empty. Mark was still asleep. The moonlight still filtered through the curtains. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Elena looked in the mirror. Her own reflection was back to normal, mimicking her terrified expression. The wide eyes, the parted lips, the hand clutching the duvet. The woman was not in the reflection, but something else was. In the corner of the mirror, behind Elena's reflection, there was a dark shape. A blur that hadn't been there before. It was the shape of a woman, standing at the foot of the bed, her hand still raised, her finger still pointing at the door. Elena shook Mark awake, her voice a frantic whisper. "Mark, Mark, wake up." He stirred, grumbling, his eyes blinking against the darkness. What is it?" There was someone in the room. A woman. I saw her. She was standing at the foot of the bed. Mark sat up, rubbing his eyes. He turned on the lamp, flooding the room with warm light. The room was empty. The carpet was dry. The door was still locked. He checked the bathroom, the closet, even looked under the bed. Nothing. It was a nightmare, he said, climbing back into bed. Or a hypnagogic hallucination. You were half asleep. It happens. I wasn't asleep, Elena said, her voice shaking. I was wide awake. I saw her in the mirror. Mark sighed, pulling her close. Look, it's an old hotel. Old buildings creak, shadows play tricks. You're stressed from the drive. Let's just get some sleep, okay? Elena wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted, too drained. She let him hold her, her face pressed against his chest, her eyes fixed on the mirror across the room. In the lamplight, it was just a mirror, a piece of furniture, nothing more. She closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe, to relax, to believe that it had been a dream. The next morning, at breakfast, Elena described the woman to Margot, the concierge. The dining room was nearly empty, the buffet table laden with congealed scrambled eggs and lukewarm bacon. Margot was refilling the coffee urn when Elena approached her, describing the wet dress, the dark hair, the silent scream. Margot's cheerful demeanor vanished. She set down the coffee pot with a trembling hand, her face pale. The honeymoon suite, she whispered. 4th floor, corner room. Elena nodded, her stomach clenching. Margot led them to a quiet corner of the dining room, away from the few other guests, and sat down heavily in a chair. She told them a story that had been passed down through generations of hotel staff. a story they were instructed to share only if a guest specifically asked. And even then, only if the guest had seen her. In 1929, a young bride named Clara had checked into the honeymoon suite with her new husband, a man named Vincent. Vincent was a bootlegger, a man connected to the violent gangs that controlled the region during Prohibition. The Grand Pines was a known meeting place for these men, a neutral ground where deals were made and rivalries were set aside. But on the second night of their honeymoon, Vincent's enemies tracked him to the hotel. There was a shootout in the hallway, a chaotic exchange of gunfire that woke half the hotel. Vincent, trying to escape, had run down the back stairwell, leaving Clara behind. The gangsters, enraged by his escape, had broken down the door to the suite. They searched for him, for the money, the whiskey, whatever it was they believed he'd stolen, but found nothing. And so they turned on Clara. They held her head under the water in the clawfoot tub. They held it there until her struggles stopped, until her body went limp, until the water in the tub turned pink and then red. And then they left her there, floating in the water, her wedding dress billowing around her like a ghost. The hotel had tried to cover it up. They paid off the police, buried the story in the local papers, and quietly renovated the room. The clawfoot tub was removed, replaced with a modern shower. The room was repainted, refurnished, the suite renamed. But guests reported sightings for decades. A woman in a wet dress. A feeling of being watched from the foot of the bed. The sound of water dripping in the middle of the night. And most commonly, a figure in the mirror, mouthing silent warnings, pointing at the door. "She's not trying to hurt you," Margot said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's trying to warn you. Whatever happened to her, she doesn't want it to happen to anyone else." Mark and Elena checked out that morning. They didn't wait for breakfast. They threw their things into their bags, left cash on the dresser to cover the room, and hurried down the stairs. The lobby was empty, the mirrors reflecting their frantic movements in an endless loop. Elena didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the front door, on the sunlight streaming through the glass, on the world outside that was solid and real and safe. As they were loading the car, Mark pulled out his phone to check the directions back to the city. He'd taken a picture of Elena standing in the lobby the previous day, in front of a large, antique mirror. He'd meant to post it on social media, a souvenir of their haunted getaway. Now, he scrolled through his camera roll, looking for the image. He found it, and he froze. "Elena," he said, his voice strange. She came around the car, her arms full of jackets. "What?" He turned the phone toward her. In the photo, Elena was smiling, her arm around Mark, her face bright with forced cheer. But in the reflection of the mirror behind them, the image was different. In the reflection, Elena wasn't smiling. Her face was a mask of pure terror, her eyes wide, her mouth open in a scream. And standing just behind her, half obscured by the frame of the mirror, was the blurry, gray shape of a woman in a wet dress. Her hand was raised, her finger pointing directly at the back of Elena's head. Elena dropped the jackets. She stared at the photo, her face draining of color. "Delete it," she whispered. "What?" "Delete it, right now." Mark's thumb hovered over the screen. He looked at the photo again, at his wife's terrified reflection, at the ghostly figure behind her. His hand shook. He pressed the trash icon, then confirmed the deletion. The photo vanished. He didn't tell Elena about it for years. He kept the memory locked away, buried under the routines of daily life, the bills and the grocery lists and the quiet, ordinary moments of their marriage. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was dark and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, he would think about that photo. He would wonder what would have happened if they'd stayed one more night. If Elena had looked in the mirror again. If the woman had pointed at something else. To this day, Elena refuses to have a full-length mirror in their bedroom. She says it's just a superstition, a habit she picked up from her grandmother. Mark doesn't argue. He buys her a small, framed mirror for the vanity, one that she can turn face down at night. And he never, ever takes pictures of her standing in front of a mirror. Because some reflections, once captured, can never truly be deleted. 3 hotels, 3 rooms, 3 ordinary people who checked in looking for rest, for inspiration, for romance, and found something else waiting for them in the dark. These stories leave us with a question that's as old as travel itself. When we rent a room, what are we really renting? A space, a bed, or a history? A history of joy, of sorrow, of violence, that doesn't simply vanish when the last guest checks out. It lingers. It seeps into the wallpaper, the woodwork, the silvered glass of an antique mirror. It waits, so the next time you slip that key card into the lock, the next time you push open the door to a room that's held 1,000 strangers before you, take a moment. Listen, feel the air on your skin. And if you feel a chill that has no source, if you see a shadow that moves against the light, or if the phone rings at 3:07 a.m., don't answer it. Sleep tight. Subscribe the channel for next video.